Okay, so welcome to the lesson 2 in this series. So now you've got Node installed, you understand how Node.js works behind the surface, and it's now time for you to actually play a bit with Node.js. So in this video we're going to first start off by talking about terminals, the difference between Windows and Unix based ones, and I'll tell you what to install if you want to have the greatest possible development experience. Then we'll jump onto an idea of not simply using Notepad because it works, but we're going to use some more advanced text editor. In particular, we're going to use VS Code, but I'll mention a few others. Okay, then we're going to spend a bit of time talking about this Node REPL, which can be useful, but you probably won't be using it too often once you pass this step over here. Then we're actually going to create our own custom file, and then we're going to write some code, and then we're going to learn how you can execute any custom Node.js file and how that works. And then at the end of this video we're going to spend some time talking about Node's global object and how it compares to a window object that we had when we were writing client-side JavaScript. And speaking of that, we're going to go through several examples and see some of the cool things that you can do using properties and functions provided to us thanks to this global object. So if you do have some experience and you still want to watch it, this later piece over here will perhaps be useful to you. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so one of the first things is you need to be a bit familiar with terminals. Now in the Windows, I would say the terminal isn't that great. Unix based terminals like Linux's and like Mac OS's are much nicer. Generally speaking, developers usually prefer them. So therefore, if you're using Windows, as I'm currently, there is a solution for that. I'm using this thing called Commander and it looks like this. Okay, and the great thing about this one is that you can use commands that you would otherwise use if you had installed, say, Linux or macOS. So for example, command called ls, which lists the files in the current directory, isn't available on the Windows. You would need to do something differently, but as you can see, using the commander this works. So I actually highly suggest that you go on, take a minute or two and simply install this commander, because you'll end up with a much nicer experience compared to using CMD, in my opinion. And to install this commander, all you have to do is to go to this commander.net URL, and this is their homepage. And then if you scroll down, you'll see downloads. You can download either one. I suggest you download this full version, and you simply then unzip it, and then you run the exe file. So now, once you do that, you'll have this terminal. And then if you want to make sure that your Node.js installation was successfully completed and simply want to test if you have Node.js installed properly, all you have to do is to type node and then space and then this -v, which stands for version. So this command over here will return to us what is the Node.js version that we've got currently installed on our machine. And as you can see, my version is this 10 over here. So if you got this working, you're good to go, because now you can actually play with it. So one of the first steps you can probably do with Node.js is you can use it in a mode which allows you to write actually commands in the same terminal window over here. So if you type node and nothing else and you hit enter, you get into this like REPL mode where you can type commands and you'll get like instantly the results of them thrown back at you. So for example, we can declare some variables. Now I could do like var and then continue, but I will be using ES6 in this course. So if you're not up to speed with JavaScript ES6 version, I do have a course on it, and I will put one of those like notification cards, so it should appear over here, I believe. Now the problem with that course is I had really old microphone, so if you can withstand a slightly worse audio quality, I still think those videos are really good, because if I had to like redo that series, I would say the same things pretty much, maybe just in a more nicer way, because I'm more comfortable with creating videos now, but the main idea is still the same. So in case you want to brush up on ES6, you can check that series, but otherwise let's continue. So instead of using var, I will use things like const and let. So let's say that we have let and we have some variable with really a descriptive name, which is a number, and we can store something over here, let's say 15. Now we see undefined because that is what you see by default once you're not actually expecting something. So we just define and initialize variable over here. We didn't say Node like give us back something, so don't be worried about this undefined. However, right now if we just type number over here, you'll see that it contains 15, and by the same token we can just say like return back to us whatever number plus like another 15 is, and you see it's 30. And then you can also use console.log statements over here, so you can actually say via console.log give me back the contents of number, and you see 15 this time once again. So the idea is if you really want to play with Node.js really quickly, you can use this method, although you really wouldn't use this method all too often because you would probably want to have files which contain JavaScript code. It's much easier, obviously. Now another thing that you might realize is that in this Node.js we're actually writing the JavaScript, and as I explained in the first video, V8 behind the surface actually takes that JavaScript, it knows how to parse it, and then ultimately it converts it into machine code, and that's it. Okay, so now this is all good and fine. However, we really want to start creating files and have a much nicer development experience other than using this terminal over here. So one software that I will use throughout this series is called VS Code, which stands for Visual Studio Code, and that is simply put a highly advanced text editor. However, you can pretty much use anything. So if you use Sublime, that's great. If you use Atom, you can use it as well. Heck, you can even use like Notepad. However, if you want to follow what I'm doing, you can install that VS Code. And to install this VS Code, you simply go to code.visualstudio.com and then you simply click over here. And of course you can read more about it over here if you're interested, but it's probably like the most popular text editor for doing the web development stuff. And once you have it installed, let me just quit from here, we need to create some folder where we'll store all of our Node.js files that we'll do throughout this series. So I'll on desktop over here simply create a new folder. Let's call it Node.js playground or something like that, and then I'm going to open this Visual Studio. Okay, so it's now opened, and now I'll simply open that folder that we just created. So go file, open Node.js playground, and that's it. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see it better, so give me a second. So probably this should be fine, and then we'll create a new file. We'll name it app.js simply because you would usually name file app.js, but you can name it anything you want really. And then we're inside here, and then I'm going to zoom it a bit more for the actual text. Okay, so now we can do the same things that we did in our terminal in this file over here. So for example, we can again create, let's say, some number and initialize this variable called number with something, and then we can say, well, okay, let's add 5 to it. And then we can also use console.log as you previously seen, and maybe we can do something like the number is, and then output the actual number. So now you might be wondering, like, how do you actually execute, like start this file over here? So what we need to do is we need our trusty terminal once again, and we need to navigate to this directory, and then we can actually execute it. So to do that, I'm going to simply go to C, like to the root level of this C drive, and then I'm going to go to the users. By the way, once you start typing the names of different folders, you can click tab to autocomplete them. So for example, my username on this machine is extreme, and if I just type something like that and hit tab, it gets auto-completed. And then we need to go to desktop, and once we're in desktop, we need to go to this Node.js playground. Okay, now also if you're new to this terminal, if you want to clear it so that you don't see these past commands that you did, you need to hold Ctrl and click the letter L, and it will auto clear it for you. So now once we're here, you can check that, okay, there is this one file exactly inside of this directory, and to execute it, you need to again type this node command, but this time you need to follow it with the file name, so node app.js. And once you start that, you see that our application was started we see this output, and then it terminated because there is nothing else in here. So if this is your first time using Node.js, now you know how to execute the code that you wrote in files, and to also use that Node.js REPL that you've seen a few minutes ago. Okay, so another really important thing to understand about Node.js is this global object. So if you ever spend some time writing JavaScript for the browsers, so client-side JavaScript, you may or may not know that there is this window object that was like present at all times, and it contained quite a few useful functions. So if you ever use something like set timeout or set interval or even console.log, all of these three things, for example, were part of that window object. So whenever you wrote like console.log, what was actually going on behind the surface is you were actually calling something like window.console.log. Just the environment was kind enough to you, so you didn't have to specify this window every time. And the same goes for the set timeout and the set interval. Now, what's perhaps more intriguing in writing client-side JavaScript for the browsers is if you just say declared some variable, say my number, okay, and you put some number to it like this, well, this variable over here was automatically part of this window object. So to access this my number, what you could have done is you could either do something like my number like this, or you could have also done something like window.myNumber like this. Okay, so now I have spent some time talking about window, and I want to do that because in contrast to this we have this global object, and we'll learn more about it right now. Okay, so this global object contains some things that are like the same, but it also has many different things that weren't part of the window object. So for example, we have some class called buffer that we'll investigate later. We have these two properties, one is called __dir name and the other is called file name. So basically these two give us the current directory name and the current file name, and I'll show them to you later. Now, interesting thing about this global object is while it looks similar to the window, it kind of behaves a bit differently behind the surface, which isn't really important for you to be able to use it successfully. But for example, you see this global object and like table of contents, and then you see this dir name, for example, but once you click on it, you see this variable may appear to be global, but it is not. So yes, it's slightly confusing. However, whatever you see here, you can pretty much use as a global object. Now, next to them, you also have this set of set interval, set timeout, set immediate, and then also clear counterparts for all three of them. We also have console. So you know that we use console.log in the previous example, and we were able to use that because Node.js guys were kind enough to actually port that console to the Node.js runtime as well, because they seen how popular that was. So I'm really thankful they did that. Next, you see we have something called exports, module, and require. Now these three are really important things that differentiate Node.js from the client-side JavaScript, and what these three have in common is that they are all about modularizing your JavaScript code and being able to break your JavaScript code into different files and folders. And thanks to these three pieces over here, we can modularize code, we can then import it, or as Node.js likes to think of it, require it. And I mean, that's really like fundamental topic of using Node.js, and I'll cover that in the next video because I really want to take time and explain it properly. But next to that, you also see that we have this process. Now this process contains quite a bit of different functions and properties, and I'll show you some of them. Some of them are really cool, like they can show you like the memory usage, they can also show you like the running process ID and stuff like that. And then we have something about URL that isn't that widely used. Okay, so now that we have seen this, let's jump into the code and play a bit with it. Okay, so in case you haven't had opportunity to play with this set timeout, set interval, I want to show you a few examples so you know what they're all about. So for example, set timeout is a function that takes as an argument another function over here, for example, and then you also need to specify as a number after how many milliseconds this function over here should call this function. So So let's do something so it's less confusing. So now let's create a new function, and this might be a bit familiar to you because what we're doing is in fact we're creating a callback function that you have seen in previous video if you have watched it. So this is our callback function, and over here we specify after how many milliseconds it should be called. So for example, we can say 2000, which stands for like 2 seconds, and over here we can say console.log and say I'll be called after 2 seconds. Okay, now we can simply go back to our terminal and simply do Node app. Now also another thing, you can specify the extension, but you also don't have to. So you can just say Node space app. And as you can see, nothing happens, but after 2 seconds we see this console.log statement being printed out. Now just to confirm what I was saying, we can do global.this and also global.this, and if I rerun this example, no error should appear, which really proves that these are part of a global object. So next we can investigate a bit a function called setInterval. So setInterval is kind of similar in like usage way, but it does something totally different. So again, we have some function that we pass over here, and over here we specify some number in milliseconds. However, setInterval will actually call this function every n milliseconds over here. So we can do something similar. So let's say console.log I'll be called every 0.5 seconds, for example, and that translates to 500 milliseconds. And then let me just put this under the comments, and then we can rerun this. So I'll go back over here, I'll clear this, and I can use just up arrow to repeat the latest command that I used, and we should see this be called every 0.5 seconds. Okay, now what I also want to stress about these two functions, for example, is if you have watched my previous video and you remember that read file example, that's exactly what's going on here. So this set timeout isn't getting executed on our call stack, but instead it gets executed in parallel, and then once these milliseconds pass by, the libuv will take this callback, will put it into an event queue, and then whenever our call stack is empty, it will actually push this function to our call stack, and then it will be executed. That's also the reason why this set timeout doesn't necessarily mean that it will execute exactly whatever seconds you put over here, but that means that it will at least take this much time. Okay, so for example, if you're doing like a bunch of different things and your call stack is full with different calls and whatnot, in that scenario, even if these 2000 milliseconds pass by, well, the call stack isn't empty, so this cannot be pushed onto call stack yet. So it can take like at minimum 2000 milliseconds, and at maximum, like, who knows. That's just like a small piece of information that I wanted to share with you. Next, you perhaps remember the clear counterparts for all of them. So what we can do is, like, say we want to call this every 0.5 seconds, but then like after 5 seconds we want to like terminate this function over here. So what we can do is we can actually like store this into my interval like this, and then we are going to use something like set timeout, and after say 5 seconds what we want to do is to clear interval, and we simply pass the handler of that interval. Now this is our handler, so we're just going to copy and paste it over here. And now if I rerun this example, we should see these statements being printed out, but after 5 seconds they should disappear, and we should see something like this, which indicates that the process has been terminated. So let's give it a shot. So we see them, and then they're done. Okay, so hopefully now you have a better grasp on how these functions work. Now, for example, you remember the dir name and the file name. So for example, let's tackle those. So we can simply do something like console.log. Maybe we want to say the current dir I'm in. Okay, let's pretend the file is speaking that. And then we can just say like comma, and then whatever we put over here will be printed next to this custom string literal. So we can simply say underscore underscore their name like this. Or I mean, if you wanted, you could also do global.this. Okay, and then if we go back to our terminal, we clear it and then we rerun it, you see that the current directory I'm in is this full path over here. Now we can do something similar with the file name. So my name is, and then file name. And in JavaScript you can, but you don't need to use the semicolons. So you're going to see a bit of a mixture of them in this series. Okay, so now if I restart this, you see that my name is, well, we get the entire directory and then plus the file name, and with the __ their name we just see the full path but not including the file's name. Okay, so another thing that is interesting is that process that you have seen in the docs. So for example, if I do something like console.log and say my architecture is and then we do something like process.arch like this, and let me put semicolon right now, and I restart this, you see that this is an architecture of my CPU. So the values could be like ARM, they could be like EA32, X32, X64, etc. We can also do something with CPU usage, so we can say my CPU usage and then process.cpu usage like this, but now this is a function this time. And if we rerun it, you see the different usages for user and system. Next, you also have a concept called environment variables. Now, we won't go really in depth what they are, but I mean, if you continue with learning Node, you'll pretty soon figure out. And then there is this process.env that will list all the environment variables. Environment variables, for example, if I can spell, okay, and then do process.env, and let me do a couple of more and then we'll see all of them at once. Another really cool one is called process.memoryUsage. This is a function now, and it will return to you like an object describing the memory usage. So we'll say my memory usage and then do process.memoryUsage like this, and that is also a function. Like another interesting one is say process ID, so we can say my process ID and then do process.pid, which stands for process ID. We can also do platform, so for example we can say my platform is and then do process.platform. And I'm now just listing like a couple of interesting ones so you can get a better sense of like what you can do with this global object alone. And you can do quite a bit of things actually. We also have something called uptime, which returns to us how long this current application was running for. So we'll say I have been alive for, and then do process.uptime as a function. And maybe that is enough for now. So let us execute all of these. So I'm going to clear it and simply rerun it once again. And now we see a bunch of different things. Now a lot of this ugliness is due to these environment variables. So I'm going to console them out for now and simply redo this. Okay, and now this looks much nicer. So we know that architecture is 64 bits, CPU usage, memory usage, and it is like split across the different sections. We know the process ID of this application, that my platform is Windows, and I have been alive for 0.077 seconds. So hopefully now you have a better feel for what that global object really is, and that whenever you use something that is in global, you don't need to prefix it with global dot and then what you wanted to use, but you can certainly do that. So we could have done this for every one of these, and that is something analog to the window object, but it's not really like clear comparison. So in the next video we're going to spend a lot of time talking about modules, which is really critical part of Node.js, and the idea behind this video is simply for you to get your feet wet with using Node.js, and I hope we accomplished that. Okay guys, thank you for watching. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, you can leave the comments down below as always. And if you like this video, do a thumbs up. And in case you want to see more of my videos, you can always subscribe so that you'll be notified. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next video where we will learn all about modules and how to import different things from different files.